You know, even though we've seen quite a bit of rain lately here in Alberta, it's been a fairly dry spring. The province has been preparing for a potential drought this summer. Now, to chat about this in more detail is political reporter and the Alberta correspondent for the National Post, Tyler Dawson, who joins us once again from Edmonton. Tyler, a major water sharing agreement was announced last month by the UCP. Now, if we have a drought this summer, will it actually be enough?
Well, that's sort of what the water sharing agreement is designed to address. Now, there's 5 stages to the water management drought sort of situation. If we get to stage 5, we're in a state of emergency. At this point, we're in a stage 4. So this is the point where, there are risks posed to agriculture, to livestock, to the economy, obviously, if there's going to be crop failures, things like that. So we're at the point where the government's been talking about this for months. They've been in negotiations since about, I think, late January is when they started on water sharing agreements. And what that amounts to basically is along the river basin, sort of in southern Alberta, you have various water holders. And so some of the biggest license holders, the ones that get to take the most water, so they've basically agreed to voluntarily use the minimum necessary to make sure that there's water for other users. And municipalities, we've seen some voluntarily. For example, Calgary has said they're not going to be washing municipal vehicles as much to try and save water. These are the sort of things that are happening across the province. You have irrigation districts, for example, setting lower rates of irrigation for some farmers in their districts, which, less than previous years, so not ideal for farmers, but enough to try and make sure there's enough to go around. Now, there's also a much larger water management plan that the government has released. So this has actually it's been really front of mind for the UCP for the last several months. I mean, I think not that many people maybe pay attention to water and water usage and things like that, but it is something that the government has very, very actively been keeping an eye on as reservoir levels have been very low. There's not been that much snow over the winter. Certainly, as you mentioned, the rain is going to help. But it's sort of unlikely that it's even possible to see enough rain to sort of get us back to where we might want to be, or where we would have been a couple of years ago. The sponge of the sort of water system in Alberta has dried out quite a bit over the last couple of years.
Wow. Tyler, the province also announced a new committee to study ways to really clean up tailings ponds more quickly. Now, the ponds are hazardous leftover water from the oil sands extraction process, and many would argue pose a significant environmental hazard.
Yeah, and obviously these are the images that don't do great for Alberta's PR internationally when photos of tailings ponds go around and activists talk about it. So there has been this committee that's been struck to study the issue. Not really much of a timeline on when they're planning to report back, but certainly these are, and they're often in the vicinity of environmentally significant areas or delicate areas and things like that. Of course, there have been stories over the years of tailings ponds leaking into water, into rivers, and things like that. So, it's a big PR thing in addition to being, a genuine problem for the environment, a genuine problem for industry. So this committee aims to, what are some of the ways this can be dealt with more quickly to prevent their further expansion and things like that. And so, a little bit controversial in the sense that you do have some environmental activists saying, well, look, this has been studied for years and years and years. We have ideas on what to do. Perhaps the issue is that there just needs to be more effort into doing it. I don't imagine this is going to be a massive controversy, but it certainly will be interesting to see what the committee comes up with when they report back down the line when it comes to the tailings ponds, because, of course, the oil sands industry is not going anywhere anytime soon, and that means neither are the tailings ponds until some sort of cleanup is started.
Yeah, it's a big moneymaker for our province here, definitely, oil and gas sector. Tyler, the UCP also announced that they're looking into expanding rail service in our province, including an Edmonton to Calgary rail line, which would be kind of cool, and a train that would run out to Banff and Jasper. Now, the study alone, however, is going to cost taxpayers around $9 million. Now, what would a project like that potentially cost? How many billions of dollars? And will we see even a referendum on it?
Yeah, well, Devin Dreeshen, the transportation minister, when this was announced, didn't even put a dollar figure on it. He said billions and billions. He said this is one of, if not the largest infrastructure project in Alberta's history that's being contemplated right now. As for a referendum, that's a good question. There's been no word on a referendum. At this point, basically, they had this sort of vision. Premier Danielle Smith is a fan of this idea, and so they're going to be doing this feasibility study, as you say, a $9 million study. Now, I went right down in the weeds of Alberta's history with passenger rail studies. It's happened a pile of times: 1976, 1985, 1986, 1985, 2004, 2008, 2010, 2014. were the years that this has previously been studied. And obviously, it has not happened. We have not had intercity rail transit since the Dayliner shut down between Edmonton and Calgary in 1986. So there's a long history of this. We've tried thinking about it, talking about it. Shovels have never gotten the ground. Will it be different this time? Who knows? But the possibility here is that there could be shovels in the ground as early as 2027. So I don't know. It's really tough to say because I know I'm rambling on about this, but I'm excited about it because I was reading so much about it. The part of the trouble here is where are you going to run that train? There's a Canadian Pacific line between Edmonton and Calgary. Do you just toss a passenger train on that? Or are you going to build a completely separate line to try and have super high speed rail between the cities? What's the cost going to look like? What are the negotiations with rural landowners and First Nations groups? There's, the issues that go into this are just innumerable in many ways. So having looked at the old reports, I'm now very curious to see what this feasibility study is going to say when they're all done and it's released publicly.
It'll take quite a while as well. Government officials said take at least 15 years to get a project like this completed.
Yeah, because they're also looking at the population projections because you need a certain population basically to sustain high-speed rail. There's the reason it works in Europe and Asia as opposed to like here. So they're looking at sort of the population projections for around 2050, thinking that might be about the time there'd be enough people. So, we all might be relatively old by the time this gets done.
It's funny though. I was thinking if somebody lived in Red Deer and they wanted to work in Calgary or Edmonton, it would be apropos. It would be wonderful, right? I'm also thinking about the GO train service in Southern Ontario that I used over and over again. When I lived in Hamilton, you could take it all the way to Toronto, and it connects all points in between. So, yeah, I mean, if the GO train service works in Ontario, I wonder if we'd see something similar to that right here in Alberta, right? Now, it appears as though the province has backed down on its controversial Bill 20, Tyler. The bill would have given the provincial cabinet the power to fire municipal councillors and mayors. It would also force amendments or repeal bylaws that the province did not like. Now, this led to quite a bit of uproar from municipalities.
Yeah, unsurprisingly, of course. They're saying, look, we're a third level of government. Our councillors are elected by the people of wherever. So are the mayors. We are representing their will with these bylaws we're passing. And so they're saying, well, look, so why should the provincial cabinet be allowed to put a stop to that or get rid of these people that have been chosen by local voters? So super controversial, obviously, and the provincial government has backed down to some extent. What they've said is, look, we've heard that this is controversial, and we're willing to take suggestions on amendments to the legislation. Now, the provincial government, Rick McIver, the municipal affairs minister, they have said that these are the sorts of powers they're reserving for extenuating circumstances. They're perhaps not likely to come fire Mayor Amarjeet Sohi or Mayor Jyoti Gondek because they're, more progressive politicians. They'd be looking at some sort of malfeasance and things like that. But still, you can still understand why local politicians would not be super keen on this level of scrutiny. And of course, the other side of it is the UCP, the Conservatives, are unlikely to be in power forever in the provincial legislature. So what do you do if the New Democrats come to power and all of a sudden you have a bunch of Conservative mayors butting heads with them? So super controversial. I think we're going to keep hearing about this because not only is it really interesting, but it's also just, every mayor in the province is mad about it. Like I don't know if there's any mayor or councillor who would support such a thing. So it's a really, really interesting sort of intergovernment dynamic. And for once, the UCP is not just fighting with Ottawa.
It's funny, you reminded me of that recall legislation that, Landon Johnston, I believe, that Calgary businessman, he ended up getting, around 75,000 signatures, a far cry from the 500,000. But he says it still sends a powerful message to Mayor Jyoti Gondek in Calgary and City Council.
Exactly. And, and that recall legislation has been used. It was used in one or two much smaller municipalities than Calgary, so that, there is sort of some of these other democratic mechanisms for removing politicians if they go too far. But of course, that's, I think, a little bit different than cabinet making that decision.
Tyler, the Alberta government is looking at overhauling our province's auto insurance program. It released 2 studies and is doing a public consultation on what Albertans are looking for when it comes to our auto insurance. What did the studies reveal?
Well, basically, they looked at what some of the options might be. And there are essentially 3 options, which are options that other provinces have. Alberta has a fully private auto insurance scheme. Quebec has a mixed private-public scheme. BC has a public scheme. I think Saskatchewan and Manitoba might have public auto insurance as well. And so this all sort of goes back to this idea that Alberta has really, really expensive auto insurance compared to other places. That it's, there's reports every once in a while saying it's, among the most expensive in the country. So this is, looking at the affordability crisis. Where can the government sort of step in to reduce expenses for people in the province? And this is one of the things they're looking at. So they've also announced a freeze on the auto insurance rate hike. I think about 3.5% will be the cap put on that. But it seems to be for good drivers, is sort of what they've hinted. So I guess we'll see perhaps what that means. So they're going to be seeking feedback to see what people want, because what this is all coming to at this point is you can't have everything. You might be able to have lower rates, but coverage or injury payouts or something might change like that, or you could have higher rates, better coverage. So it's going to be a real weighing of values, or the values that Albertans have regarding their auto insurance. But this was in the mandate letter to, I think, Nathan Neudorf, the utilities minister. And so certainly we're going to hear more about it. Maybe not the world's most exciting issue, but certainly something that people might notice in their checkbooks when things actually change.
A little extra money for us is good, definitely, in our pocketbooks. Tyler, the Alberta NDP leadership race is ongoing. The party's choosing Rachel Notley's successor on June the 22nd, and I believe the next debate is coming up Saturday in Calgary. So who's the front runner right now? Is it Naheed Nenshi, the former Calgary mayor?
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. Part of the struggle that the candidates for this leadership have had is just name recognition, fundamentally. Some of the early polling basically showed that these people were not really known outside of their home communities, which for most of them, except for Nenshi and Kathleen Ganley, is Edmonton. So, they have to obviously appeal to New Democratic Party members in Lethbridge and Medicine Hat and Calgary and wherever. So that has been a real challenge, I think, for some of these other candidates, where Nenshi has this name recognition across the province because of his time as Calgary mayor, because of his response to the 2013 floods. So the name recognition has been a big part. So that, I think, is probably in many ways why people are thinking of Naheed Nenshi as the front runner candidate. Sarah Hoffman, I have thought, is putting up a very strong fight against him. There has certainly been some criticism of Nenshi as sort of a late entrant to the NDP party. The NDP being, of course, a progressive party. Nenshi, of course, sort of trying to cast himself as a post-partisan politician, neither red nor blue. So there's identity questions circulating for the party. There's this issue of brand identity. What is this party after Rachel Notley? I think it's fair to say Nenshi's the front runner, but whoever wins this thing, I think, is going to have some pretty big questions of, party cohesion, of their affiliation with the federal NDP, and of, just what is this party after Rachel Notley. So it's going to be very interesting keeping an eye on them for the next, 6 or so months, I think.
And didn't Nenshi also mention if you mix the red and the blue, you get purple, which is his favorite color too, right?
It is his favorite color. And you know what? But I don't know if you get purple if you mix blue and orange. So
No.
The analogy maybe almost doesn't quite work for Alberta.
We're still awaiting a survey information on the Alberta pension plan, Tyler. Reporters have been fighting via access to information legislation, but to no avail. The UCP says that Albertans would walk away with, 53% of the CPP?
That was their initial sales pitch. Yeah, last fall it must have been when they came out with that big report saying if Alberta left the CPP, took our money with us, we'd have like 53% of it, and it would be, a very robust pension fund. Of course, this was super controversial. The NDP jumped all over it. Both federal Conservative Party leader Pierre Poilievre and federal Liberal Party leader Justin Trudeau have said, no, please don't leave the CPP. This, we're stronger together, all that sort of stuff. And the UCP's, wouldn't say they've backed off of it, but it certainly has not taken up that much of their time in the last few months, because it is really controversial. It's not necessarily a massive vote getter or winner, but there's been this attempt by reporters to get, basically more information. What information is the government receiving from Albertans, and what are they doing with that information? And it's just, they haven't released this stuff. There's various exceptions. We don't need to get into access to information law, but there's all these exceptions the government can use to not release information. And that's sort of where they've been going with this. And they've said that they can't find some of this stuff. And it's just a whole mess. And it really makes it look like the government's hiding something, when in fact that data and that information might not really be all that interesting. It's one of the, you never know until you get that sheaf of documents on your desk and go through it. It could be a great story, or it could be absolutely nothing. But certainly a tense bit of a standoff there. And I think it's something that Albertans are still thinking about in my life, anyways, probably yours as well, even if the government isn't talking a whole ton about it right now.
And it's created a lot of tension as well, hasn't it, between Alberta Premier Daniel Smith and Justin Trudeau and our finance minister as well, Chrystia Freeland, with the possibility of Alberta pulling out of the CPP.
It has, and with other premiers and other finance ministers in the provinces as well, who are looking at this and saying, well, if Alberta takes off with all this money, how do we keep the CPP, solvent for all of our retirees in Ontario and Quebec and British Columbia? So I think it's really, even if it's really good for Alberta, it's certainly been very, very controversial elsewhere. And outside of Alberta, I don't think there are very many people who are in favor of this idea. So even if it moves forward, if it goes anywhere, it is going to be a matter of Alberta fighting a battle on, a dozen or so fronts against a lot of really unhappy people.
He's our legislative reporter and the Alberta correspondent for the National Post. Tyler Dawson, thanks so much for joining us today from Edmonton.
Thanks for having me, Hal.